I recently had someone make a Facebook post on one of my comments claiming that Americans were just lazy these days and wanted a handout all the time. It is a typical Republican belief that poor people are just lazy. Until the economy collapsed, I kind of believed them.
I did a Google search for "poor people are lazy," and all I got was a quote from George Bush from the Chicago Sun-Times, and the article was so biased that I believe it was a mind quote. The portrayal of Bush's behavior in the article is, to anyone familiar with the way Bush behaves in public, uncharacteristic of him. And all the other links I found were from Democrat Party sites talking about Republicans saying that poor people are lazy. You'd have like a forum post saying, "Why do Republicans think that poor people are lazy? My dad works," he'll bring the obligatory story. "My dad works 2 jobs to support his family," or "I have a friend who works 2 jobs," and all the people say, well, the response to that will say, "Well, because Republicans are stupid and they're ape men," and stuff like that. Now, I was a neocon for some time, and I really mean that. I'm not just saying neocon as like some slur. Okay, I believe that, well, for some time, like 6 months only, but in that time, I believe that constitutional republicanism was the end of history. And I supported the Iraq War, not because of terrorism or weapons of mass destruction or any of that bullshit, but because I wanted the U.S. system of governance to be imposed on Iraqis, but really on anyone we could cook up an excuse to invade. Okay, I bought into the gap in the gap states and the integrated core states and the seam needed to be pushed down in the march of history, and because you saw constitutional republicanism beating out the monarchies of Europe, beating out the Soviet Union, taking hold in China and Latin America. Right? Constitutional republicanism was, in my mind, the final form of government, the perfect form of government, or the most perfect form of government that could be achieved by humans, by human nature, something that I clung to then. And I was a big fan of townhall.com, National Review, The Weekly Standard, Newsmax, Front Page Mag, and I was an avid listener to Michael Medved, Dennis Prager, Hugh Hewitt, Rush Limbaugh, all the conservative talk show guys. And this sentiment that the poor are poor because they are lazy was not something that I got. Now, maybe I had selective hearing then, or maybe now I have selective memory, but the argument was not that the poor people are lazy, but that reducing taxes results in higher disposable income. And disposable income is what tends to be invested. You're not going to invest your grocery bill or your rent bill. But an investment results in economic growth. Economic growth means jobs. Now, rich people tend to invest a greater portion of their income. So, to increase real investment, tax cuts for the rich is how you do it. Now, you can call this trickle-down economics if you want, but it's the process of how self-sustaining jobs are created, and this process is not in dispute. But to cut taxes, you have to cut spending, or else you're going to get inflation. Now, Republicans obviously don't want to cut the military, right, because we want to conquer the world, give everyone a brand new religion, so they target welfare. Now, I agree that there are some problems with this line of reasoning, though probably not what you're thinking, but it's not the simplistic, "they're just lazy" mantra that the Democrat Party hacks like to caricature and quote mine the Republicans as having. Maybe you can find some, forum dwellers who say that, or you can find Bob's blog who says stuff like that, but the big guys in the conservative movement, that's not an argument they make.
I also used to ascribe to the idea that overweight people were just lazy until I began having my own weight issues. It's amazing how you can think like this if it has never happened to you.
That's what you think? Well, my experience has been the exact opposite. I got a little bit chunky and then decided to lose the weight. I counted calories and ate 1,000 calories a day, and I walked 10 miles a day, and I lost the weight, and I'm glad I did. I lost a little bit of muscle mass, but I gained that all back very quickly as soon as I started eating normally and working out again. So no, I think you are lazy. Lazy what? Lazy compared to the people who aren't fat. Now, there's a very small chance that it's some genetic issue, but that's very unlikely. It's probably a mixture of laziness and not being able to control your appetites generally, and food, your appetite for food in particular.
The mindset is, if we remove things like welfare and unemployment, it will motivate people to find work.
Nope.
That's a very old and intuitive mindset, but science and data tends to be counterintuitive to what we perceive.
I don't see how it's intuitive. Is effort the limiting factor, or is the limiting factor that there are just no firms willing and able to hire people, or is it a mixture of both? Okay, until we know some facts, no position is inherently intuitive. So you can't say it's an intuitive argument. And moreover, this isn't even the argument that most conservatives make anyway. Also, no, I'm just going to have to assert this. Science and data, or science and facts, whatever you said, tends to be intuitive. And it tends to confirm what we already believe. Okay, things become a discovery or invention or a breakthrough because of some counterintuitive truth that was found. And they're rare because they are counterintuitive, and most things even the results of most studies tend to go along with the hypotheses that people have. And if you want to think of this like even more, you may think this is a stretch, but I don't. Every day, you make hundreds of implicit hypotheses with all the actions you do. And you take a step, you're assuming you're not going to fall down to the center of the earth, and you assume you're not going to fly up into the sky. You make tons and tons of hypotheses. When you lift up something, it's like, oh, hypothesis. Well, if I perform this action, then this bag is going to lift up. Oh, hypothesis confirmed. Hypothesis confirmed. So many implicit hypotheses are confirmed, and that's really all that needs to be said about that. So to recap, this sentence was wrong in 3 ways. 1, the argument is not intuitive. 2, that's not the argument that conservatives make. And 3, the science and data tends to be intuitive. It tends to confirm our hypotheses. There's also the problem of what is science and whether the study of political economy can even be called science. But this depends on the philosophy of science, but there's no need to bring out those guns for Anubis's middle school economics here.
So the question is, are Americans lazy? Labor studies is extremely well studied, mostly in the European sector, but it's not really well known or well explained to most of the people of the United States. Let's look at the kinds of work that exists. There is tangible labor, intangible labor, wasted labor, and gambler's labor. Tangible labor is the kind you see the results from and get instant gratification. The results are there. The reward is there. You clean something and it looks nice. You pick a fruit, you eat it. You build something and you see the results. Then there's intangible labor. This is what most of us do. We're cogs of the machine doing parts that we will never see the finished product of, or we have to wait months before we see what we get. Then there's wasted labor. We all know about this. When our inefficiency is so high, we can see all of our efforts going down the drain. There's also gambler's labor. This comes in 2 types, positive and negative. Positive gambling labor is when you aren't sure if your work is going to pay off, but the probability or perception of probability is fairly high. Also, the chances of serious negative consequences should you fail is low. An example of this is that Google gives their workers time to work on their own side projects. There is no negative repercussion so long as some work is actually shown to have been done. And they get bonuses if they come up with winning programs. Most of their best programs have come from this kind of freedom and autonomy brainstorming, and the workers work harder and feel great about their jobs. Negative type is where you put a ton of work in and it has a high probability of being wasted. And an example of this is job hunting in a bad economy. You work and work and work and work with little chance of getting payoff.
Oh, well, what about hobby labor? Labor that one does for one's own enjoyment. What about community labor? Labor one does not for his own gain, but for the gain of the community in question, be it the family, the neighborhood, the church, the club, or whatever. Or, farming. Farming is obviously foundational labor. It's a separate type of labor. It's foundational labor, as everyone needs to eat, right? And so agriculture is the true source of wealth, with everything else being an offshoot of agriculture, or being a process enabled by agriculture. And so agriculture is the true economic activity, which is what the physiocrats are saying. Okay, you can make up an infinite number of types of labor. This isn't real economics, right? This is the illusion of economics. This is, I don't have time to explain all this stuff, but economics is more general than this. And I just have to say, you don't know what you're talking about. And Anubis's constructions actually remind me a little bit of this clip.
But one day the Aborigine descends from the inland mountains, and as he gets closer to the coast, he jumps hundreds of centuries in only a few days. Here at Port Moresby Airport, where his trip through time ends and where he cannot find a reason for all that he has been taught and is seen so hurriedly, the seed of the cargo cult, the cult of the cargo planes, is born in him. And the cargo cult has its temples almost everywhere nearby. This is one. Its altar is standing 9,000 feet above sea level. The dummy plane is at the edge of the landing strip. At the other end, the control tower. The natives of the Rozo and Mikeo tribes are waiting for some plane to land on their strip, attracted by the bamboo model. They believe that planes come from paradise. Their ancestors sent them. But the white man, a crafty pirate, manages to get his hands on them by attracting them into the big trap of Port Moresby.
Of course, even worse is the financial problems that occur, so the stress makes you worse at interviews, dropping your possibilities of getting hired even more.
Okay, let's rephrase this plainly. So, desperately needing a job makes people worse at interviews generally, okay, making it less likely for people, right, all people, who are all affected by stress and whose only competition is, who? Each other. Right? It makes it unlikely for all people to get a job. I don't think I even need to say anything more, like hopefully the viewer can see how stupid this is.
Starting your own business is like a combo of positive and negative gamblers' labor. 60% of new jobs in the past 30 years in the U.S. were created by small business ventures, which is why governments have and should try and reduce the negative stress of small business owners.
Okay, 60% of new jobs were created by small business in the past 30 years. Thus, the state should make it easier for small businesses to do their thing. Funny you should mention this. Now, I don't know what the more recent stats show, but let's assume that this trend of 60% holds roughly to today. Or it holds today. Let's just assume that. Now, how do you make it easier for small businesses to create jobs? Do you force them to provide medical benefits to employees? Do you force them to pay Social Security? Is that going to help? Do you force them to accept the state-enforced legal privileges of the labor unions? Now, and remember, like these labor unions, it's not just people getting together and bargaining, right? If it was just people getting, I mean, bargaining happens all the time on the market. No one's against bargaining. But this is not bargaining. This is unions giving their employees legal privileges. Do you want to hire people if you're going to have to deal with, unions, state-enforced unions? Do you want to hire a lot of people if it's very difficult to fire people who don't pan out, making each employee a greater risk? Okay. I just find it so odd that Anubis talks about how we need to enable small businesses to create jobs, yet he supports the Democrat Party and keeps blasting the Republican Party, which is ostensibly more pro-market and would make it easier for these small businesses to create jobs, ostensibly.
It also reduces customer spending, ensuring that further jobs won't be created, as demand will be extra slow to increase.
Aggregate demand drives economic growth. When will this idea die? Okay, let's make this super simple. Let's say you are going on a long-term camping trip out into the wilderness. Do you choose to take some skinny guys who know how to camp, or do you take some fat guys along who will eat all your food, who eat a whole bunch of food? And you go out there and say, you know what? Things are all right here, but what we need more aggregate demand. We need to bring some fat guys out here who will consume more of our stuff, because then we'll trade stuff with them or something. I don't know. Now, here's the thing. If more people get hired, then they're producing more. That you have more people producing stuff, and so production is higher. Okay, this higher production results in there being more total stuff in the economy, and thus total real wages will increase. But like the thing is, production is what drives growth, okay? Not demand, right? This is true. This is obvious. Production comes before consumption. Now, I know the Keynesian bullshit is more sophisticated than that, but for now, I'm just addressing Anubis the doofus here, okay, not Keynes.
I'm currently finishing up Robert Sapolsky's book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and holy crap, does long-term massive stress have major impact on every aspect of your life. It shortens your life, shrinks your hippocampus, increases insomnia, which causes further stress, atrophies neuron connections, increases your weight, increases your chance of debilitating depression, and more. Is it any wonder that North Europeans spend half as much in medical costs and live longer? and that we have massive heart attack rates in the U.S.?
Okay, so what he's saying is that North Europeans spend half as much in medical costs, yet live longer, have lower heart attack rates, and have lower, and this is because of their lower stress levels. Anyway, here's the Net Happiness Index from Nation Master, who compiled the list from the World Values Survey of 2005. Now, this is from 6 years ago, but remember, the U.S. had higher medical costs, more heart attacks, and didn't live as long back then too. Now, perhaps some other explanations for these things could be the demographics of the U.S., right? Black and Hispanic people tend to have different bodies from white people. Black people tend to be more obese than white people. Black people tend to have higher blood pressure than white people, despite having lower reported stress levels than white people. Or we could also look at the dietary culture of the U.S., right? The fast food culture. Another thing to keep in mind is that the U.S. is much more diverse than these other states, and diversity is a proven way to make a community less happy, less trusting, and have less civic pride. Link in the description. And please spare me the wailing and gnashing of teeth on this. Diversity is a proven depressant of any community. This is true. Okay, as for medical costs, that's much more complicated. In 1970, U.S. medical costs were roughly 7% of GDP. In 2004, it was 15.3%, and it's going to go over 20% pretty soon here, I heard. Now, the Social Security Act of 1965 resulted in the creation of Medicare and Medicaid, so perhaps it just took time for those effects to work themselves in. Also, the Health Maintenance Organization Act was instituted in 1973, and perhaps that is responsible for driving up costs, right? So you had one act 5 years before 1970, and another act 3 years after 1970. Perhaps the effects of these is what resulted in the increased cost by 2004. But also keep in mind that in the U.S., the number of doctors per capita has remained constant since around 1910 or something. I'll link to an article talking about this. And the doctors per capita has remained constant despite the increased spending. And this is a result of state medical licensing boards. That is, to legally practice medicine, you have to go to a university that is approved, that is accredited by the state. And so these universities form a cartel arrangement that legally limits the number of doctors. Well, Medicare and Medicaid spend a bunch of money on medical services, right? But this spending won't result in a concomitant increase in the supply because of this legal state-enforced cartel arrangement, these legal restrictions on the number of doctors, and this results in a ballooning of costs, but no increase in supply. Or almost no increase in supply.
The rich used to believe that they were so much greater than poor people because of breeding. The only thing they had up on the poor people is that they had better education and much lower stress. In rhesus monkeys, the bottom monkey in the hierarchy has such high levels of stress that ulcers develop and the monkey can't become fertile.
Okay, rich people have an advantage over poor people, not because of genetics, but because of better, quote, education, close quote, and lower stress. He uses an example of stressed out, low-ranking rhesus monkeys developing ulcers and becoming infertile, and we're supposed to assume that poor people are like the monkey at the bottom of the totem pole. Okay. Well, the problem with this, first, is empirically that rich people are actually more stressed out than poor people in general. Now, it may be self-inflicted stress, but that doesn't matter. Anubis was saying that one of the reasons why poor people are, remain poor intergenerationally, I guess, I'm inferring that, is because of the high stress levels, but rich people are actually more stressed, so that argument can't stand. The other part of his argument, the education part of his argument, also doesn't make sense. And I saw this in a prior video, and he just assumes education has these magical powers. He claims that richer people have a better education. Well, and maybe that may be true, that richer people may have better education, but they don't have any superior access to education. The Milwaukee voucher study shows that students who apply for vouchers and get them do just as well in school and in getting into colleges as students who apply for vouchers and don't get them. Okay, which supports what I've thought all along. The reason we have crappy schools is crappy students. It's not complicated. And really, what does it mean to have a better school? Better teachers? Is that the limiting factor? Better textbooks? Smaller classes? Why? Because we learn so much in discussions? Really? Like listening to what Mexican girls' opinion on the bean trees? Is that what facilitates education? And how is this stuff even relevant in the age of the internet? Or how does having a worse textbook in high school really result in poor performance in college, where kids only spend 10% of their time actually doing schoolwork anyway. Okay, and another thing a lot of people like to point out is the high violence rate in a lot of these black schools, and that these high violence rates is the reason for problems. But, and I'm just going to have to go off my own experience here. But the reason, well, the voucher study shows that this is bullshit. But the reason I think this is bullshit is that what blacks do is that they'll tribe up or gang up or whatever, and then they'll tear each other to shreds. Okay, they have a lot of honor stuff, like you disrespected me or something like that, and they'll get in a fight over that stuff. And these petty little things, they'll get in fights over that. But the thing is, if you don't start nothing, there won't be nothing, and they'll leave you alone. If you're at school to study, you'll be left alone. They're going to beat each other up. That's what they do. None of your business. Just leave them alone. And the funny thing is that blacks, who are the ones getting in all these fights, are actually less stressed than whites anyway. Now, Anubis didn't make this argument, but I'm just preempting it because I get it a lot, and it's related to what we're talking about here. I guess in college you can benefit from legacy status, or if your parent is just super rich, then you can benefit from your parent making a donation, so get into an Ivy League that you otherwise wouldn't get in, but that's pretty rare. But the legacy benefit is not as high as one may think. And another thing is that it could be the case that with two otherwise equal students, the legacy student actually tends to perform better than the non-legacy student, right? Kind of like, the coach's son thing. And so the legacy bonus could actually make sense from a purely academic point of view, and it's not just pure nepotism. Okay, but on the point of breeding, Anubis just dismisses this, and his dismissal is just stupid. We know that there are genes associated with substance abuse, and twin studies show that ambition and IQ, whatever IQ measures, is attributable to genes. Okay, and since people tend to marry people like them and have kids with people like them, what on earth would we expect other than ambitious people to pass on their ambitious genes, and then those people who are ambitious then pass on their ambitious genes to their kids, eventually creating a whole milieu of wealthy and successful people? I don't understand this denial of genes when it applies to human characteristics. They have no problem with genes when you apply it to dogs or any other animal, but in humans, when genes are supposed to describe the behavior of humans, that's not allowed. Blank slate is the default assumption here.
Being born poor is the best way to ensure you will stay poor, not for the lack of working hard. Most work their asses off, contrary to Republican propaganda. The stress and lower quality of education ensures that most of them will not have the time and breathing space to self-reflect much. Welfare is meant to give them a leg up in this area. Is it perfect? Far from it, but it's better than nothing.
Again, he asserts that this is Republican propaganda, which I've already dealt with. But also, just last nail in coffin here, rich people tend to work more hours than poor people. So, are poor people lazy? Lazy compared to who? If rich people are the standard, then yes, poor people are lazy compared to rich people. Laziness is subjective, but if you're going to use rich people as a standard, then yes, poor people are lazy. Sorry. He then says welfare is better than nothing. That's just his assertion. I'll counter by asserting that it's worse than nothing. I could say, well, cutting off your finger, is it perfect? Is cutting off your finger perfect? No, but it's better than nothing. I could say, this is just an assertion here. I see his video, and his video has all these thumbs up, and I'm just wondering, who are these people? Anubis can't go 10 seconds without producing these crystalline specimens of multidimensional falsehood, and it's really disheartening to see so many people listening to this trash.